Hello, my name is Brendan Decora, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, Pro Audio Profiles. Here, I'm going to interview recording engineers, mixers, producers, and others in the pro audio field. Together, we're going to learn how you can make amazing records that can give your listeners goosebumps. Welcome to the show. This week on the podcast, we have Candace Stewart. She's a studio manager at EastWest Studios and has been recording studio royalty for over 30 years. Enjoy. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Sure, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So can we start with a little bit of your backstory? How did you get to where you are?
I actually have three older brothers, and two of them are recording engineers. Mm-hmm. And they're musicians, and they came to LA to become rock stars. But they got here and they needed jobs, so they both got jobs at the record plant on 3rd Street in like the late 60s, like 1969.
Okay.
And they started there, and then when I was in high school, I would come out and visit. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and I would come out and visit them. And I never had any intentions of getting involved in the industry whatsoever. I was a psychology major with a business minor. I was going to be a marriage counselor. And so I came back out to California. My whole family was out here. I was the only one who wasn't out here. My mom, my brothers. I have 3 older brothers, and they all worked at the record plant. But the 2 older ones were the engineers. And I came out when I was 26, and I had bartended all through school to like pay my way through college. Mm-hmm. And I was bartending, and then during the day, my brother asked me if he would help him. My brother, Steve Smith, asked me if he would help him at his studio. He'd taken a room over at the old Kendon in Burbank, where you worked.
Where I worked, yeah.
And that's where Paula started, is where Rose started. We all kind of ended up there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's all 3 of us started at Kendon or post-Kendon.
Right.
But anyway, so I helped him out during the day, and it's a long answer. And he was he was training me to be an assistant engineer. Mm-hmm. So for the first year and a half, it was just him and I and one other person running the small studio. And all these people that were his clients were like people that he'd worked with at the record plant, his peers at the time, like Mike Klink and David Bianco, people like that they had all come up together at the record plant. Mm-hmm. So I was learning how to be an assistant engineer. And after about a year and a half into it, I had done a couple sessions, and I was fine. I was actually okay, but I had done a session with this guy. His name is Shel Talmy. He's blind. He's an engineer. He's still alive. He's still working. He'd done the Who, the Kinks, all this stuff. Wow. And I did a session with him, and I was running a tape machine, and he was great. He was awesome. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the session, I realized that I was never going to be the most incredible recording engineer in the world because he was blind and amazing and is amazing. And so I went to my brother, and I'm like, I just don't think I have the electronics aptitude to be the most amazing recording engineer in the world. And if I can't be the most amazing recording engineer in the world, then I don't want to do it. Obviously I have an ego. And then I said, but
only the best.
Yeah. But I said, I think I can help you book it.
Okay.
And he said, oh my God, please. Because I had worked in hotels and bartended and done these hospitality jobs. So he said, please. And one of the very first things I booked was Appetite for Destruction for Guns N' Roses with Mike Klink.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. He's still my client now.
Yeah. I know Mike very well.
Yeah.
He's told me stories of working on that session.
He's great. Yeah. I'll tell you some too.
Awesome.
So that's how I got started. Okay. And it was called Take One.
Right.
And it was at the old Kendon. It was after Kendon had closed. It's at 619 South Glenwood Place.
Yep.
Still a studio, still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after that, you worked at, what was it, Sound?
Well, I went to Red Zone because in that same courtyard, instead of being one facility when it was Kendon, and when you worked there at Glenwood Place, it was 2 separate, completely different studios.
Okay.
So 619 was Take One, and 623 across the breezeway was Red Zone.
Right.
So when my brother shut down Take One in 1989 and went to Seattle, brilliant move, went to Seattle, I walked across the breezeway and asked the owner of Red Zone if they'd give me a job. And I feel kind of bad. They fired their manager and gave me a job.
Jeez.
I know. I felt kind of bad. Debbie Walensky, if you listen to this, just know that I feel bad about that to this day. But yeah, they fired her and they gave me the job. So I worked there for 4 years. So I was actually in that complex for almost 11 years. So I worked there for a long time, 10 years. And while I was at Red Zone, You can stop me anytime. But while I was at Red
please.
Zone, I met John Porter, who was an English producer who worked with the Smiths and all these other records. And John and I became really good friends. And I worked at Red Zone for a while. I worked at Red Zone from like 90 to 94.
Okay.
And I got poached from Red Zone by a guy named Biff Vincent, who was becoming partners with Buddy King at Sound Castle in Silver Lake. And then I went to run Sound Castle in Silver Lake, which is no longer a studio. It's a private studio now called Pulse. Okay. But when I went there, it had been all this Dave Jordan. Dave Jordan had done all these records there. So it was like Alice in Chains, Jane's Addiction, all this stuff. So I was like, awesome. I get to go to this rock studio. It's going to be awesome. Right. And I got there, and he moved out, went to his own place, and it all became gangster rap.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it was like 1994.
Oh, jeez.
I know, it's great.
Dang.
Yeah, it was great, though. It's funny. I was at the Tech Awards at NAMM this year, and I was walking through the room, and this guy came up to me, and I think it was Nate Dogg, but I'm not sure. But he came up to me and said, "Oh, my God, I remember you from Soundcastle, and you saved my life," and all this other stuff. And I was like, "Oh, crap, I did." Yeah, because we worked. It was crazy. It was like Biggie and, Snoop and LBC Crew, Bone Thugs and Harmony, Wu-Tang. I met RZA then. But I didn't know anything about like Bloods and Crips and East Coast, West Coast. I didn't know anything about any of that. And, I was a 30-year-old white girl from South Carolina, I didn't know shit. And I don't know anything about rap or hip hop at all. And, but we had a great time. And the guys that were my assistants then are my still really good friends now. But yeah, crazy.
Nice. Yeah. And you were there for how long?
I was there. So I mentioned the John Porter connection because I was at Sound Castle from 94 or actually maybe it might have been 93, I'm not positive, to 98. And John reached back out to me and said, "Hey, I met this guy and he wants to buy a studio and start a label." And they were going to buy Sound City. And then they changed their minds and he called me up and he said, "We're going to buy 6,000 Sunset." And I was like over the moon because every manager, I don't know about now, but every manager at the time certainly knew about these historic buildings, United Western, Ocean Way, et cetera. And so the guy that he worked for, his name was Rick Adams, and he was in partnership with Mark Levinson. And they had started Cello, which was a label and a high-end audiophile manufacturing company for home theater.
I actually didn't know that they had a label, too. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah, there was a record label, too. So John ran the record label. John Porter ran the record label. And unfortunately, the label closed about a year in, but because I worked for the studio and they were separate companies, I was not, I didn't lose my job.
Okay.
But so Rick Adams bought this building, the 6,000 Sunset building that had been Western, that had been part of Ocean Way, and he named it Cello. And we opened in January of 1999.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And you
worked there.
I did for a little while, yeah. And then the transition from Cello to EastWest.
So crazy.
Were you here the whole time? What did you do in between?
Dude, it was so crazy. So what happened was Rick Adams decided to get out of the studio business in 2005. Contrary to what some people will read or say or think, and you know this firsthand, we were extremely busy. Cello was extremely busy.
Up until the very end,
until the day of closing. But he bankrupted it because it was part of an overall larger portfolio and he was being sued. And so he bankrupted it, which actually ended up being a blessing in disguise. I didn't realize it at the time because it protected it and it put it within receivership of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court. So all of the gear and everything got sealed inside the building and the building was protected. And I, in the interim, in March of 2005, after Cello closed, I went to work for Mark and Stefan Fantini at Sage and Sound.
Okay.
Yeah. And I worked for them part-time for a while. They were so great to me. They were awesome. And while I was working for them, this is an interesting story. So I was working for them. I got a call. Well, no, they called me and said, "We're at Firehouse in Pasadena working with this composer." I believe it was Mark Mancina. Okay. And they said, "We're here and they have this amazing cabinet for their Pro Tools rig. And we want you to call the manager at Firehouse and find out where they got this cabinet." And I was like, Okay. So I called, and the manager at Firehouse, her name was Lindsay Tomasic, and very cool. And I called, and I said, hey, where did you get that cabinet? And she said, is this Candace? She was whispering. She goes, hey, is this Candace Stewart? And I'm like, why are you whispering? And she goes, well, do you want a job? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, why? And she goes, well, I'm going to leave Firehouse, and it's a really good job. And I'm like, well, who owns Firehouse? And she goes, well, Tina Clark. So Tina Clark had been a client of mine at Soundcastle.
Okay.
She'd been a client of mine, not really too much at cello, but she had bought and built this studio in Pasadena, in Old Town Pasadena, called Firehouse. And it was inside the stables of what was the original fire station in Pasadena, which was the first fire station to have the men and the horses and everyone all in one place. It was built in like 1898.
Wow.
And that was very cool. It's a historical landmark.
Is that studio still around?
It closed. Actually, everything closes after I leave, but it's not because I'm so great. It's just like I dodge a bullet because I left in 09.
After you leave.
Yeah.
Yes.
I left in 09 and I didn't want to leave. It was a great gig. But anyway, so try to make this chronology and timeline make sense to anybody who's listening to this. So I go to Firehouse in approximately May of 2005. And I worked there until 2009. Well, in January of 2006, and in the interim, all the time of that first year of 2005, I was trying to save $6,000. I was trying to find venture capitalists. I was even trying to buy it myself. I'm glad I didn't. But I was trying to get all these people, and I had partners. You might remember Tony. He was my partner.
Yeah.
So I had all these people that were trying to help me, and we were going to leverage publishing catalogs, all these things that we were going to do. I contacted Rick Rubin and the Stones and all these people.
Right.
And nobody wanted to save it. They just wanted to buy like the gear.
Right.
And so, which is understandable. But I was like, okay. So I had this friend named Doug Rogers that I had known for a long time.
Okay.
I'd been friends with Doug Rogers for a long time. And Doug had his company, which is EastWest Sounds, the sample library company. And Doug had an office in Beverly Hills, and he was recording all over the world whenever he was doing his libraries.
Right.
And I said, well, why don't you, and he's an audiophile. And so I and so I can't even talk. So I called him up and I said, why don't you just buy, cello? And he said, oh, I don't know. The building's in a state of disrepair. The building's over 100 years old. We're sitting in Studio 2 right now.
Right.
So you're aware. And I said, please, please, please buy it. You can record in it. You can put your offices in it. It'd be great. And in 2006, in January of that year, almost a year to the day, right around the end of January, I was on my way down to NAMM, and he called me up, and he said, I bought it. He said, I started to cry. He went to the bankruptcy court. The only other person there, I think, was Alan Sides. Alan wanted the gear, but Doug wanted the gear and the building. So the bankruptcy attorney, chose Doug to let him buy it. So he bought the building and all of its contents, I believe, right around January 6th or 7th of 2006. And I was at Firehouse. I stayed at Firehouse.
Right.
He hired Philip Stark, the French designer, to come in and make the lounges and all the changes that you've seen in the communal areas and the kitchen and bathrooms and stuff. But he left the rooms the same. And the whole time, he was super cool, super respectful. I got to meet Philip Stark. Even though I didn't work for him, I was for Doug yet. He would be, ask me questions, and he rehired our tech, rehired our accountant, rehired a lot of people.
Did you talk with him about taking over the management? Once it opened,
initially, no.
Okay.
Because initially I thought he was going to keep it private and just use it for the libraries. But after that first year, I soon realized that probably wasn't going to happen. So I convinced him to hire Jen Hilliard, who had been my assistant when it was cello, because I wanted to stay at Firehouse. I thought Firehouse was great. It was an easy gig, and I loved Old Town Pasadena. It was beautiful, and I loved working for Tina, who I just talked to today, who's my client still.
Nice.
I know, it's crazy. And so, no, initially not. And then he did all this, retrofitting and redesign and all this stuff. And Jen was here. And I think Jen probably did a fine job. I don't think he gave her long enough. But right around 2009, I don't think she came on until like the end of 08 or the beginning of 09. So about 9 to 10 months into it. Because during the other time prior, the 2 to 3 years prior, he was recording and he was fixing the building.
Right.
It wasn't open to the public for almost 3 years.
Right. Major repairs
Yeah.
and redo
New
all
roof,
the
new air
lounges
conditioning, hospital grade electric, all the things we
Yeah.
always wanted at cello that never had.
Right.
So, but he would come out to see me. He came out to Pasadena, and he acted like driving. Doug, if you're listening to this, you're gonna laugh. He acted like driving to Pasadena was like driving to Mars. I mean, he thought it was so far. It's really not that far, and he thought it was so far. And he's like, "You're bored." And I'm like, "No, it's a great job. I'm not bored. It's awesome." He's like, and then like he drove out a second time, and he goes, "Well, I really want you to come back." And I said, "Oh, but Jen's doing a great job." And he said, I just, she's not the right fit for me, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I want to make clear that Jen is great, but he said it wasn't the right fit. And that if I wasn't going to come back, he was going to find somebody else. And I was like, what? What are you talking about?
Right.
So if you're listening to this, Doug, you suckered me back in. So yeah, he suckered me back in, and I came back in January of 2010.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Full circle.
Yeah.
I know.
And you've been here ever since.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's crazy.
Awesome. So there's obviously this place is historic, and there's been countless amazing things that have done here. Is there any, projects that stand out or that you particularly like?
I mean, there were certainly plenty during the cello years. I've been obviously now I've been here longer than cello was open.
Right.
But during the cello years, God bless Rick Rubin, Jim Scott, Rich Costi, Dave Fiddleman, Dave Schiffman, all the people that were part of that crew, all the people that came. I jokingly say that I basically just bring people in and hire them and train them to be my clients later.
Right.
Like you.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I particularly loved Chris Cornell. So I was particularly, I don't get starstruck. I'm not particularly starstruck. I don't know how well you're allowed to say you know me, but you know me pretty well.
Yeah.
So I'm not allowed. I'm not particularly starstruck, but I love working with the Stones. All those things are certainly great coups in a career. But I love Chris Cornell. So when Audio Slave was here, I was extremely thrilled, and I love those records.
Yeah.
I think they're really good, and I think he's amazing.
Yeah.
So God rest in peace. But in the EastWest years. Anybody, again, listening to this podcast, if you were an artist that came here and I'm not giving you a shout out, do not be hurt.
Well, we'd be here for 3 weeks if we talked about everybody.
Oh my God, because I love all of you and I'm grateful to all of you. You're the reason that the studio is open and that we have our jobs. But one of my favorite sessions that ever came in was the Foo Fighters.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It was just the most magnificent group of people. The behind-the-scenes support crew as well, and Greg Kirsten, who produced it, obviously. I love Dave Grohl. I love Pat. I love Dave. I love all of them. I love, Shiflett. I love Taylor, Rami, Nate. They're all just amazing, and the entire crew. Julian, who works for Greg Kirsten, and Alex Pasco. It was just really fun, and it was really long.
Yeah.
Chili Peppers, too. Chili Peppers have always been really loyal. And when I first came back in 2010, they came in and did a record. They've been super, super cool. And we just did, of course, another record with them for 10 months last year.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Loyalty is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide detailing my techniques for recording huge snare sounds. Check it out now at brandondecora.com/huge snare. And now, back to the show. What are some of the key factors you think that attract the top engineers and musicians to choose your studio?
People ask me this pretty often, actually. And obviously, the studio is historic, so it's got a track record.
Yeah.
The acoustic spaces, they're incomparable. Bill Putnam designed them. That's that. But at the end of the day, what I always say is it's just a building without the people in it. Right. So my staff, my assistant Keith, who's amazing, Lawrence Malcho's my tech. I think what it really is, for people that are new clients that just like find us on the internet, I think it's probably the pictures and the history and the track record and the credits.
Yeah.
For people who know us and have been here more than once, or who've been here when it was Ocean Way or when it was cello, I think it's trust. I think it's a relationship with me and my staff, and knowing that no matter what, we have their back,
right,
and that we'll make sure that everything's cool. Because engineers, they work in multiple rooms with multiple artists. Artists don't only make like one record a year or something like that. So you can't really depend on just one artist.
Of course.
So it's really the A&R people, the artist managers, the engineer producer managers, people like Jeremiah Grabber, people like Frank McDonough. Again, if I'm leaving anybody out, Angie Brightman. There's so many great guys. Who did I just put that Pink Floyd thing with? Who's that manager? Anyway, I know this is old age, but I think that it really is the people. I think the people that work for me and hopefully me make the difference, and probably the reason why people pick us.
Right.
Is that trust.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think it's a real thing, the trust
Absolutely.
thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what part does obviously we just talked about this a little bit, but when it comes to like the environment and the atmosphere, like obviously Doug has spent a long time remodeling and making it a beautiful facility.
God bless him, because that was just the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
I mean, the room sounding great and everything is key, having great gear, all that. But having a place that people walk into where they kind of go, wow, it sells itself for me. I mean, it makes my job really easy because it's like people walk in and they go, oh my God, because it's really cool looking. There's a nice big kitchen. The bathrooms are really nice.
Right.
That matters a lot, particularly to our pop divas. Make sure everything's really nice and fancy.
Yeah.
Everybody has a private lounge.
Yeah.
So I think the winning combination that he created with having this historic place with a track record, with these acoustic spaces, with a good staff, with this really cool redesign.
Right.
You know, and I think it's like, the lounges and stuff like that. If you've never been to EastWest, hopefully you'll look it up online and you'll see while you're listening to this podcast, the lounges and everything, that's all new. That's all stuff that was never here before. So, and it's super hip. So you've got this super hip new part, and then you've got the rooms which are historic and left the same, been the same as they always been.
Yeah, and as an engineer, like I'm come here for the same reason. It makes my job super easy. The rooms sound so good and everything's, maintained well. It's like you just push up the fader and the job's done.
Yeah, you look like a genius. It's awesome. I know we joke with drummers all the time. We're sitting in Studio 2, which is kind of a known rock drum room, and the same for the musicians. I think it makes it easy for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Over the years, have you witnessed any trends or shifts in the type of projects that are being recorded?
Well, the main thing that's changed is the length and the duration that people book time. It's unusual for people to book, 6-7 months, although we certainly love it.
Yeah.
The main changes have been, the real main change has been a computer instead of a tape machine.
Right.
That's been the main change.
Of course.
But we use tape all the time. The other things that I've seen come and go, and I know that the people that are listening to this that believe that Atmos is the greatest thing on earth, I've seen so many things come. The Euphonics consoles, all 5.1, any multi-channel mixing. Now we're object-based mixing with Atmos. There was Oro, there, which I think is amazing. If you don't know what Oro is, look that up, because Oro is like kicks Atmos's ass. But it won't be a format.
Right.
It's just not feasible, and it's owned by a company in Belgium. But anyway, Dolby will win.
Yeah.
That even 360, Apple, all those things. I think that Dolby will certainly win the American market for sure.
Right.
If not the world, with Atmos. And I think that the repurposing of existing catalog into Atmos is cool. I think it's particularly relevant in conjunction with picture. Right. Just me as a consumer and as a layperson.
Yeah.
I personally don't think it's all that important for just music, because when I'm in my car, I think this is where I listen to a lot of my music.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, is once once the time comes when Atmos is being implemented in a lot of cars.
Yeah, cars. Yeah,
then it
that'll
could
change.
Really take off too.
Well, and certainly the streaming services are now dictating that it be delivered that way. So the good news about that is it's created a lot of work for mixers, and it's created a lot of work in repurposing catalog into this new format to sort of reintroduce people to it again. You know, some things lend themselves well to multi-object mixing, and some things don't.
Right.
You know, I think again, it's in the ear of the beholder.
Yes.
I think that the Apple EarPods with their Atmos capability and the binaural aspect of them, I think that's very cool. And I think that if you listen to your music mainly through headphones, which by the way is a bad idea, you shouldn't listen to headphones all the time. It's really bad for your hearing. I want to say that to you young engineers out there. Do not put headphones in your ears all the time. It's really, really bad.
It's hard to judge the overall volume, too.
Dude, it's really bad for your ear. It's really bad for your ear having something right up against your eardrum. But that notwithstanding, most of us do listen to music through headphones.
Of course.
And earpods, AirPods, et cetera. So I think that everything has its place, but having seen things come and go, you know, there will be something else that will come along. Yeah. I mean, in the immersive and virtual reality sphere, I have no doubt that in my lifetime, at some point in time, there will be a helmet that I put on my head that projects a hologram, or I'm going to watch a movie through my brain. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be crazy, you know, because you've already got a lot of virtual reality stuff happening and a lot of experiences.
Yeah.
Is it experiential? Is that a word? But experiences where virtual reality, AI, et cetera. I personally don't want AI to mix all of our music for us because I think that we hear analog, and I think that anything like that would be more of a digital concept, and that doesn't appeal to me. But
well, there's a lot of emotion that takes place in the mixing stage as well,
dude, and in the recording process. Like, I mean, if that gets taken over by a machine, where are the happy accidents? You know, where's the collaboration that happens? Where's the human element?
Exactly.
It's kind of like the self-driving car. That's not going to work unless all cars are self-driving.
Yes. I agree.
And call me resistant to change, but I don't think that's a good idea. It's kind of like when Sully landed that plane on the Hudson. Right. If you watch that movie about that plane, you realize that it was the human element overriding the computer on the plane that allowed him to make a decision to save the people's lives. Right. So save lives. Let people mix your music. That's my analogy.
Awesome. So along that same vein, how does the studio embrace some of the new technologies and techniques while also preserving the legacy and reputation that it has?
Yeah, well, obviously, we have to go with the flow, and we have to get what people need. Pro Tools being the key thing. Then there's a lot of universal audio plugins. There are a lot of incredible audio manufacturers, Manley, Isotope, Antelope, Logic Pro. You know, there's a lot of innovations being made. Thankfully, they're making them for us, and they're upgrading and assimilating and combining, like Logic Pro, I don't know what company it is. It's incorporating Logic Pro into their DAW. I can't remember. But basically, all those people who create and manufacture innovations in audio, we are open to those because we are, after all, client-based and, you know, client-driven. So it's really what our clients want. You know, it's what they need, really.
Right.
If I get enough requests for something, then we'll get it.
Yeah.
More or less. Yeah.
Exactly. And what do you think makes a recording session successful?
The assistant engineer. Seriously. Like without, obviously, a well-rehearsed band.
Right.
A happy band. You know, that's not too stressed out.
Right.
An artist that feels first things first, an artist that feels comfortable in the environment. Right. So if the artist feels comfortable in the studio and they're working with a producer that can elicit their best performance, then that comfort and that trust fans out to the engineer, the assistant engineer. And I think a lot of weight rests on the assistant engineer's shoulders, like we said. An artist might be coming into the studio for the first time. An engineer may not have worked here before.
Yeah.
So it's up to the assistant engineer to create that environment of welcome and make them feel like, we've got you, so that the artist can then relax and create. So yeah, I think the best recording session happens when an artist is inspired and feels comfortable.
Yeah. And as a manager, how do you facilitate that?
Well, it's such the little things.
Yeah.
The devil's in the details, as it were. It's finding out what they like to eat. It's finding out, you kind of learn, as a manager, you can ask all the questions you want of their manager and of the label and of the artist assistant and stuff like that. But you also I rely on my staff, on the assistant engineers, on the tech department, on my assistant, and on the runners a lot because they'll meet the clients often before I do. Right. And they sort of have to read, like, is this person really private? Do they like to be engaged with? Are they shy? It's all about, it's very much, I always use this analogy, it's very much like running a hotel with technology. Wow. So the second that someone comes in the door, I was recently at a hotel, for example, where the customer service sucked. And it was little stuff, like, they didn't have a bellman and they made me carry up my own luggage. Or they, when I call room service, they said they were short-staffed and couldn't bring me a coffee. You know what I mean? Right. So that's the kind of stuff that if it was me and I was the manager of that hotel, I wouldn't let that happen. Right. Yeah, like I try really hard. I mean,
of course.
I try really hard to make sure that people have what they need and anticipate their needs so that when they arrive, it's like, oh, it's that little thing like, oh, there's some flowers or, oh, there's something that they like to drink or there's some, pastries, whatever that little thing is that makes them feel welcome. We make banana bread all the time. Yeah. And
your
one
recipe.
Of the reasons,
amazing.
Well, now we use a box in conjunction with sort of my doctored recipe, but originally it was my scratch recipe, you're right. And I had this theory that the smell of cookies or banana bread made people feel like,
right.
like
it's true.
Like it's really yummy. You brought me the cookie concept. You were the cookie monster. So you had that, you told me about that. But I thought, it's those little tiny things, So I think that again, artists are sensitive,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Impressionable, as our engineers, as our, as everyone in the creative process. So me as a manager, my job is to make sure that the people that are here make people feel welcome and that the clients have what they need.
Right.
It's little stuff sometimes, like ridiculous little stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Like Mike Klink doesn't like walnuts in his banana bread.
Right.
Finding out if someone has an allergy.
Yeah. That's true.
You don't want to bite into banana bread and go into anaphylactic shock.
Right.
So. That would be bad.
Jeez. Is there any specific pieces of equipment or studio features that you believe contribute to the sound quality or experience?
I think it's the acoustics of the rooms.
Yeah.
I mean, the consoles are amazing, and I'm proud of them. Right. The Neves, the A-Range, which I think is amazing. It's actually my favorite. Just because I like Studio 3 a lot. But every room here is great for many different things and pretty versatile. Studio 3, which is the smallest track room, has no isolation, but if it was in our house, it would be big.
Right, yes.
So, in Studio 2 that we're sitting in, but I really ultimately, it's Lawrence who keeps it all running, so he's super crucial. Lawrence Malchow is our tech, our chief engineer. But I think the one piece of quote-unquote equipment, I would say it would have to be the acoustics of the spaces. The chambers, the plates, the consoles, tape machines, analog outboard gear, analog mic pre's, plugins, things like that, the Fairchilds. If you made me pick and said, what piece of outboard gear would you have to have, it would be a Fairchild, like a 660 or 670, for sure. An analog one, a real one.
Definitely.
But all of those things aside, I think it would be this. Yeah. I think
Because you can bring in your
you
own
can bring in
mic
stuff.
pre's or mics or whatever you want, but
Yeah.
the sound of the room is what you're coming for.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And we do have a lot of vintage mics. I think it's the combination, but I think the rooms. Yeah, I think it's the rooms.
Yeah. Cool. What have you learned from your experiences working with different engineers and musicians and producers?
Well, I have a pretty good reputation, and I'm a pretty easygoing person for the most part. But in the course of almost 40 years, I think there's maybe been 3 times when I've had a real altercation with a client, or kicked somebody out, or had a real problem. I think that. Wait, what was the question again?
Just what have you learned from all the different
what have I learned?
people? Yeah.
To be patient.
Yeah.
To be patient with people, and that everybody, someone might come in and might be having a bad day. Try not to get defensive, to try to be, helpful. I'm by nature a gracious person and a helpful person. Right. But I won't say that I haven't been tested
of course.
by clients and stuff like that. I would say if people are listening to this, one thing I think is really, really important is respect. Because and I mean that in the sense that if you're an engineer or you're a client coming in from the outside, be respectful of the studio. If you're not going to show up, let the studio know. If you're going to be late, let the studio know. If you're an engineer and you're having a hard time, and you can't make it, let me know. I'll get a replacement. Right. I think it's just, be respectful. In this culture that we live in the generation now, everything is so last minute and everything is kind of disposable.
Yeah.
And I think that people forget that a common courtesy or common consideration goes a long, long way.
Yeah.
So I would say that for every person involved in the chain, I would think that the client be polite to the engineer be polite to the assistant be polite to the runner. Right. I think me be polite to everybody, and artist managers be aware of the studio. I mean, we're here to serve you, and don't take advantage of us, and don't treat us like we don't matter and not show up or try not to pay us. Yeah, that's not cool.
Of course.
Pay us. How about that? There you go.
Awesome.
That's what I've learned. Get paid.
Perfect. So I like to wrap up each podcast with the same kind of questions.
All right.
The first one is, what has been your most influential teacher?
There have been many. So many. Every engineer I've ever worked with, every producer I've ever worked with. But for my specific role, and originally, my brother, Steve, who brought me into the business, God bless him, because he was really influential. He taught me, he reinforced all the things I've talked about, the attention to detail, the respect, all those things. But Rose Mann, who was sort of the grande dame of what I do. And there were other managers before Rose, Dee Willoughby, people like that. But for me, it would have been Rose Mann, Paula Salvatore, who were sort of mentors to me in how things are done and the right way to do things, And Rose kind of set the tone for a lot of the policies that we have now, actually. Right. I think we have the Beatles to thank for the 12-hour day. I think really? I read somewhere.
Where that come from?
I read somewhere that the 12-hour lockout came from the Beatles. But Jeff Emmerich was, God rest his soul, he was intimating that had come from them, because before then they had been like normal work hours.
Yeah, I always wondered who was the jerk that set that up?
Who set the 12-hour day, right? Because it used to be like 8 hours, and like they would do archiving and night and do different things, people. But I would say Rose and Paula for sure, big influences on me. I mean, we each have our own style and our own personalities, but I hold them in high regard and consider myself lucky to have lasted this long and be in their company.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. The next question may or may not apply to you. It's basically like, what is your favorite reference track when you go into a new studio? But what's one of your favorite songs that you like to listen to?
I listen to a lot of music. I listen to old music and new music, but because I am a product of I'm 64 years old, and I have 3 older brothers, so I'm the product of my youth as far as that goes. Right. But favorite track, probably something off of Revolver.
Okay.
Or Sticky Fingers, maybe. I'm a huge fan of engineers. I want to say that while I'm on this podcast, I'm a real proponent that engineers are the unsung heroes of all the music we've been listening to for the past 60, 70 years.
Right.
And I say that all the time. And that's one thing I will say to those people listening to this who are in other aspects of the industry. If you're a manager, if you're an artist manager, a business manager, please don't discount the engineer. You never know. You don't understand how important the engineer is into getting the best possible recording for your artist, and you wouldn't get on a plane without a pilot. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah.
So, but favorite reference track, right now I'm listening to a lot of Coldplay and a lot of Muse and stuff like that. Okay. But I like blues. I like everything. But either Sticky Fingers, Wild Horses, maybe a Zeppelin track or something off of Revolver.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Last question, which you've touched on a bit already, but what would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer?
Learn everything you can about analog and digital gear.
Right.
When learning about DAWs, when learning Logic, when learning Pro Tools, it's great. If you're fast at Pro Tools, that's an awesome skill. I think it's harder than it ever was because now there's analog and digital stuff, and you might have to run a tape machine, and you might have to handle a reel of tape. I would say learn proper mic placement.
Yeah.
I would say that's something that people may miss and not realize that a small adjustment on a mic, and don't over mic. That is me as an observer, when I see someone come in and they set up a string aid and they've got it's a quartet and there's like 50 mics, it makes me realize the person may not know what they're doing because they're not really utilizing the sound of the room, which is kind of the point. So you can argue with me on that, but I'm right.
Perfect.
Would you think I'm right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, don't. Less is more.
Yeah. Mic placement is everything.
Yeah. Less is more, less mics put in the right spot.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
That was great. That was so fun.
I really appreciate it. Awesome.
Yeah. Brendan's an amazing engineer, and you should hire him.
Thank you.
He's super talented. There you go.
Sweet.
All right, that's my closing.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening to the show. As you know, I'm just getting this started, and I'd love your feedback on how I'm doing, if I should keep this going, what your thoughts are. Feel free to visit proaudioprofiles.com and send me a message. Until next time.